welcome back, Weirdos and Weeboos, to the channel Mission Doge, where today, well, as you can see, I have managed to get to All-Star rank in Stadium before the mid-season, and I'm hoping to keep pushing this so that I can actually reach Legend rank. I'm not sure, because of course, All-Star is a much more difficult rank than all the previous ones. It's the point at which the rank system actually becomes real in, Stadium, so we'll see how well I do. That being said, in the meantime, I'd like to show you some of the builds I've been using to climb in Stadium, because I've had some massive success with them. Now, a quick disclaimer before I get into these builds. While I usually like to show more creative builds where I feel like I'm probably being really original and showing you something you've never seen before, obviously, these are try-hard builds. Don't get me wrong, I have optimizations in them and little details that I imagine most versions of these builds won't have, but at the end of the day, they are generally going to be kind of what you expect. As well as that, there's a bit of a disclaimer I have to give straight away. Because of the fact that I have a propensity to ramble and there's a lot to explain, it's probably best I split these into multiple videos, so even though the main builds I want to look at today are just a Moira and a Zenyatta build, I'm probably just going to have Zenyatta be the only one for this video, and I'll do a Moira video separately. There are also a couple of other builds that I feel like I could cover, but I'll see if I feel like it when I get round to it. These are the two, though, that I feel I absolutely must cover, and they're certainly the two I've been using the most. I really do think that Moira and Zenyatta are the two best characters in Stadium right now by quite a large margin. Maybe if you're a really cracked Lucio, then Lucio is the best, but I think that's only for people who really know how to Reddit Lucio. For your average player, Zen Moira, insane. And I'm not just saying that because, like, lol, Moira's, like, S tier in Plat or whatever. No, genuinely, like, Moira's actually kind of a demon in Stadium specifically. You actually get rewarded for stat farming because, it gives you credits. With all that said, though, the focus of today's video is Zenyatta. Now, this right here is the build I'm going to be showing off in this video, but one thing you might notice immediately is not just this build, but all of my builds basically don't include common items, and there's a reason for that. It's not because you're not going to be using common items in the early game, of course, I mean you have to, you literally can't afford anything else. But it's because, to be quite frank, usually the common items that I buy in the first two rounds of Stadium have literally nothing to do with what my build is. So let's just cover some bare basics, some stuff I hope all of you watching already know, but just in case some of you don't. When you buy an item in Stadium, you at any time, if you don't want it anymore, can sell it back for full price. This costs 1,000 credits to buy, and if I want to sell it, I get 1,000 credits back. This may not be a good example, because in the practice range you have infinite credits, so it just displays the current cost of your build instead, but you get the idea. If this was a real game, I would gain 1,000 credits for removing this from my items. And that's the exact amount I paid for it. Just to make it absolutely clear, that means, for any of you that are unsure, there is literally zero cost of any kind to changing your mind on what items you want. Now, of course, the same doesn't go for powers. You do have to be careful with the powers you pick, because you can't replace them later. But any items you pick are completely non-committal. The next round you play, if you don't like the item anymore, you can chuck it away and put something better in. For that very reason, usually, considering that round 1 I only have 1 power, and usually the build is nowhere near, like, where it's going to be by the time round 7 comes along, I don't actually make decisions based off the build. I make decisions based off my character, what my comp is, and what the enemy comp is. So in most cases, there's really no point in me including common items in my build, because the common items I would want you to take would completely depend on your team and what the enemy team is and have nothing to do with the build itself. If you are curious though, with this build I recommend starting with 10% ability power, 10% weapon lifesteal, and then either taking first aid kit or armored vest. Take armored vest if you're more concerned about being dove, take first aid kit if you're more concerned about taking poke damage. The weapon lifesteal is here because it's a survivability tool that's pretty good value for cost. You can actually afford it because obviously you couldn't afford this and an armored vest, it's too much money. And although you aren't investing in weapon power, you're still going to be firing orbs regardless, and in fact you're probably going to fire most of your orbs at the tank, which is going to be a pretty consistent target and source of lifesteal. Just want to get that elephant in the room out of the way straight away, because I know someone's going to ask about it otherwise. I just think it's a waste of slots in builds for me to include early game, so instead I skip straight to the mid game and then the late game. Oh, actually, a bit embarrassing, I meant to edit this build earlier to add in an item that I actually completely forgot I didn't have in here. 1 second. Yeah, sorry, I've been using this build so long I kind of forget to edit it. If I decide I want to make a change, I kind of just, play differently. I don't always follow the build, like, word for word. But that meant I kind of forgot. I used to have Phantasmic Flux here, and I don't think it's a terrible item to take in this build, but I think it's definitely better in other builds, so I've just replaced that with Divine Intervention. I'll explain this later when we get to it. Either way, I'd like to take a quick moment, I'm sorry but I do think this is important, to explain why I predicted that Zen was going to be busted in Stadium, why I was still surprised that he was as busted as he was, because I didn't think it was going to be this bad, why I think he's just generally so strong in Stadium, because understanding that really helps you abuse him in Stadium. Okay, so first things first. If you didn't know, the developers are very much aware that Discord Orb is inherently an overpowered ability. Like, it's just the way it is designed, it is always going to be a problem. It is too powerful to be able to have an ability that can cause so much extra pressure to go onto any target that is being focus fired, just for someone looking at them and not being dead. That is a little ridiculous. But the justification as to why Zen is allowed to have an ability as oppressive as Discord Orb on literally no cooldown, with the only requirement being looking at someone for even a millisecond. The reason it's supposed to be balanced is because Zen has no tools to save himself when he gets dove. That is the intended weakness of Zen to balance out his very, very oppressive aspects of his character. Now you can dislike that, because I certainly have mixed feelings about it myself, but that is the way it's supposed to be. That Zen gets to be broken until someone switches to a flanker and shuts him down. Infamously, a good Tracer, Sombra or Genji will not even let Zen play the video game. In normal Overwatch, that is. But then there's Stadium. Now first of all, the main thing that Discord Orb is really good against are people who have a lot of hard stats, because the more health you have, the more damage amplification is going to affect you, and the more focus fire you can take. I probably don't have to explain much further, everyone gets bigger health bars and becomes tankier in Stadium, which means that your Discord Orb gets more value on literally every single character. Obviously primarily the tank, but even all the squishies now become less squishy in Stadium, making them juicier targets for your Discord Orbs. But if it was that alone, it wouldn't be a big problem. What's a bigger problem is that that includes you. Just so you know, Zen's breakpoints are so, thin, so difficult to balance, that in Overwatch 2, when its first beta started, because of the fact it was a hard dive meta, Zen became the worst support in the game by a mile, considered by just about everyone. And yet, to help him, they gave him just the tiniest buff, 25 extra HP. At the time, everyone was still 200 HP, so we went from 200 to 225. That was it. Do you want to know what happened? He immediately went from being the worst support in the game to the best support in the game, by a significant margin, because he got 25 HP. Insane, I know, but that is just how polarizing the smallest breakpoints become when you have a character as much of a glass cannon as Zen is. So now imagine what happens when you put a character that becomes broken when you give him 25 extra HP into a game mode where he can buy all the HP he wants. I probably don't need to elaborate. The fact that Zen can buy survivability items, but his design inherently makes him oppressive in any situation where he can even get small survivability boosts, and yet he can buy all the same survivability items for the same costs without any extra downsides, is stupidly powerful. And as if all this wasn't good enough, there is yet one more reason why Zen gets to be broken in Stadium. The main thing that counters him barely exists in Stadium. If you actually pay attention to the amount of dive characters in Stadium, one of my biggest problems with Stadium is that there's almost none to choose from. The only dive tank in Stadium is D.Va, who by the way, isn't even supposed to be a main tank. She's supposed to be a dive tank off tank, as in, she's not supposed to dive herself, she's supposed to enable dives, but she's forced to dive herself because it's a single tank format, which is something she's not actually very good at. So yes, she can dive, but it's far more clumsy than diving with a Winston, or a Ball, or a Doomfist, who all aren't options in Stadium yet. When it comes to the DPS role, you only have Reaper and Genji. In fairness, Genji's pretty good at that job, but Reaper, he can do it, but he's certainly not the best option for dive. Ironically enough, supports are so overtuned at the moment that they actually have the best tools for diving at the moment in Stadium, I would say. I would say if you want to dive, your best bet is to go Lucio, or to go Moira. But that should really illustrate my point, that we have so many characters in Stadium, and yet so few of them are even capable of diving, and most of the ones that even are capable of diving aren't very well equipped for it. Like, they can do it, but it's not really their specialty. They have to make themselves uncomfortable or clunky to use to be able to achieve that end. So when you have a roster of characters almost exclusively intended for poke or rush playstyles, and then you have a character that destroys rush playstyles and also can only be countered by dive, you end up with an absolute demon. So that's why I knew Zen was going to be broken, and even though it's nothing to do with this specific build, that helps to enlighten you as to why Zen is so good in Stadium and how you should use him to abuse that fact. The fact that you can be so oppressive just by simply being alive means that just like in the regular game of Overwatch, your main priority as Zen is just to exist. As long as you exist, you are not dead, You are discording a target that people can shoot, and you are harmony orbing someone who needs healing. You are doing your job as Zen. And obviously, you will get more if you do more. But at the end of the day, you are going to be doing a decent job if you can just stay alive, heal people, and discord people. That's it. And I'm not going to lie, that's pretty damn easy. In fact, one of the biggest reasons I even recommend this build isn't even necessarily because it's such a hard carry build. I mean, don't get me wrong, I obviously think it's very powerful, but in fairness, it's actually quite a passive build, where you don't usually get all too involved. But that actually also makes it kind of good for climbing. I mean, you gotta remember, climbing isn't just about being a sweaty tryhard that wins all your games, it's also about having a build that you can repeatedly play without bursting a blood vessel from, like, you know, stress or frustration, or without, like, you know, falling asleep from exhaustion from all the keys you've been mashing. And to be quite frank, the fact that this build is so easy to pilot and yet so effective makes it really easy to just queue up game after game after game with this build without it really eating away at you. With all that said, what is the build? Well, you probably already got an idea by looking at it. It's a pretty standard AP Zen build, and the only thing that's really important about it is the specifics about how I go approaching AP Zen. The main benefit of AP Zen is it makes you a much better support in terms of pure healing. Zen goes from the slowest healing character in the game to actually one of the most powerful healers available in Stadium if you actually spec into ability power. So the point of this build is just to be really hard to kill and really good at healing people. It's simple, but doing those two things, 1, makes this build very easy to play, 2, makes you a really helpful teammate because you're providing a lot of healing and a lot of support and you're basically never dead, and 3, because of the focus firepower that Discord provides, you don't even have to do that much more in most games. Obviously there will be games where you do have to do more, but even in those situations you can use the fact that you have so much more survivability to force yourself onto some weird angles that you'd never be able to get away with usually on Zen. That's probably the one bit where this build can get difficult, is understanding how far you can push your limits. You definitely want to keep your death count low, but if you do get into games where you have to take the driver's wheel a little bit more and actually take control of the game, because for whatever reason your teammates are not capable of winning this game off their own merits, even if you provide them the proper support, if you find yourself in those situations, you need to have a really good understanding of how far you can push your luck. And if you do, it allows you to actually be really good at making space with this build. You essentially become a miniature tank. You have to play a little bit more cautious than your typical tank, but still, you get to play aggressively, push up, take cheeky angles where any Zen would explode normally, but your build gets to get away with murder constantly. You almost actually rage bait the enemies into making mistakes you can punish them for. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it genuinely seems quite powerful with this build to just take an angle that any normal Zen would die on, and not even have to do anything immediately with it. Just make yourself very obvious and obnoxious. Just fire blindly into the choke, just discord people, just get people's attention and be like, hey, look at where I am, you want to dive me, don't you? And a lot of times, if you have a good understanding of your limits, and you build it well, and you know how to dance along the line, people will take that bait, dive you will live, and you will kill them for trying. It's a clunky method, but it's a method that works, and it certainly makes space in the weirdest way possible. Okay, so that's the overview of the build. Let's talk about the powers. First of all, I just want to say, generally, when it comes to these builds, I am a massive fan of adaptability in Stadium. It depends how you play. I know some of you would like to stick more to the rulebook and just do exactly what it says on the build, but I very much adapt my powers to the situation. And for that reason, I actually almost struggle to pick the powers to put on my builds, because I'm rarely picking all the same powers in all the same orders every single game. There are powers that I always take, and there are powers that I sometimes take, or powers that I maybe change the order of depending on the context. This is especially true here, as I think there's actually a ton of powers you can run with this build, so this is how it's going to be split. Essentially, this first power here is the only power that I say you have to take with this build. Even then, in theory, you could ignore it, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think this power is always correct to take round 1. There is no situation in which you should not take this power round 1, as far as I can imagine. Every power beyond this is one that I think there are circumstances where you may not want to take it. However, I think it's more likely than not you will want to take all 3 of these powers. After that, there are even a couple more powers I think you could take, however I think they're more situational. Whereas these are, you probably want this, but you might not. The others are more, you probably don't want this, but you might want them. So let's start with the auto take, Inner Peace. A power that I genuinely, as mundane as it looks, I genuinely think this is probably the single most overpowered Zen ability. No, the most overpowered power in Stadium. I know it sounds so mundane, but you don't understand. This gives you a Harmony Orb that is always attached to you, and it heals for 75% less. So, how about we stack up some good ability power, and we get ourselves a real good amount of healing going. I don't know. I must admit, I should remember by now which like are the best things to pick to like max out your ability power. I know a decent amount of them, but I think that's good. I think you can get 120 somehow, so I think I missed one, but oh well, I'll figure it out later. So I've got this Harmony Orb on myself. How about we go turn these bots into rocket bots so they do some more damage, and see how powerful this self-heal is. I have no damage resistance right now, by the way. Do you see that? Do you see the self-heal? The rocket bots literally can't even out-damage me enough to get to my armor, let alone the health underneath it. They can't even break my shields. Again, I have no damage reduction and no health buffs. The only reason my health bar is bigger is because the more money you spend, the bigger your health bar gets, even if you take no... Oh, actually, I think... Sorry, this comes with 50 armor. But other than that, yeah, that's the only buff I've got. That is all self-heal, baby. And that is just from taking ability power. And then keep in mind that I'm healing other people at quadruple that speed. Yeah, I hope this makes my point. In fact, what could make my point even more is what if I use Transcendence now? Now look at my ult charge bar after this ends. I am not shooting any shots. I am not discording. I am literally doing nothing but AFKing. I am already 50% to my next Transcendence. I don't even think... Did I... Okay, no, I did take Catalytic Crystal. Good. Okay. I actually forgot if I took this or not. That's another reason why this is going so fast, is because I took Catalytic Crystal, which gives me 20% more ultimate charge from ability-based damage and healing. But yeah, either way, that's a part of the build I recommend anyway, so I don't really think it's cheating to include that, because I was going to get to that later. But yes. So that is why Inner Peace is so busted. And by the way, it's not just good for ult charge. I'd just like to remind you, anything that gives ult charge gives credits too. So you are actually gaining money as Zenyatta, not only for taking damage so long as you don't die, so you can heal yourself. Not only are you practically unkillable, but on top of all of that, you're gaining money and you're gaining ult charge. For taking damage. Literally, you punish the enemies for shooting you if they don't finish you off, by literally saying, haha, screw you, I got money off of you shooting me. Now, I will admit, while I knew this power was good straight away, on the first day I played Zen, I was pretty close to figuring out this build pretty quickly. I got most of this build figured out on day one, but one thing I got wrong is that I always used to take instant karma first instead. But the longer I played, the more I realised Inner Peace is stronger. That being said, instant karma is still a very powerful ability, so let's take it for a second. Instant Karma makes it so that whenever a target of your Discord Orb damages you, you restore 30% of the damage they dealt to you over the next 2 seconds. Which is a pretty powerful ability. It's essentially 30% damage resistance, just not versus burst damage. So, let's see some of that self-healing action stacked with Inner Peace. By the way, this time, this is with absolutely no ability power. This is 0 AP Zen. And you can see I'm still basically face-tanking these rockets when I combine the Discord Orb with the self-heal. I think I might finally die here. Nope, still alive. Yeah, the next one would kill me, but yeah. Now, obviously, if we see the difference here, what if we tried just face-tanking this one that isn't discorded? Oh, we might lose on the second volley. Big difference, big difference. You get to see the difference in action there. So you might be thinking, wait, that seems more significant than the self-heal, honestly. Like, don't get me wrong, the self-heal was more powerful than that when I had full AP, but obviously now that I have no AP, you can see how much more the Instant Karma is healing than the Inner Peace. Wouldn't you want to take Instant Karma first and only take Inner Peace in the late game? Okay, you can do that. You might sometimes want to take Instant Karma first, but let me explain why I don't think you do. First of all, I tested it. This does not grant ultimate charge, and so I also believe it shouldn't grant credits. Whereas this one actually does grant credits and ultimate charge, so that means that you earn more money if you use this one the first round. This one's also more universally applicable, obviously, so that makes it just more flexible. It makes it better, because if you're taking your power early, you're never going to be able to take that back. And that's really important because you don't have any information for the most part on what your team is doing, what the enemy team is doing, what you're concerned about. So I like to take powers that are more situational later in the game when I have more information and I know more for sure if I want them. Whereas powers that are more just generally always going to be good or more core to a build, you obviously take first. Because this one is good in every situation and it makes you more money, I always take it first. Even if it takes longer to scale than Instant Karma does.
Now you might be thinking, how is Instant Karma not good in every situation? Because of the fact that it's only the person you're discording. That doesn't mean the ability is weak, but it does mean it's not universally applicable. What it means is, you are really, really, really good at dueling. Like, if someone comes to duel you and you discord them, they basically lose. They have to dominate you to win. I know it might not sound like much, but 30% damage resistance just for discording someone, that is a ludicrous amount. I mean, I already said, 25 extra HP was the difference maker between Zen being the worst support in the game or the best support in the game before. Imagine what a Zen that has a 30% boost to his survivability gets. Like, I probably don't have to explain any further. It is broken in duels. But that's the thing. That's in a 1v1. What if you're being shot at by more than one person? Well, then it sharply drops off. I'm not saying it's terrible in a 2v1, it's okay in a 2v1, but gets to a 3v1, or even a 3v3, even if it's just not just you, it starts to look pretty bad, and yeah, if you're talking about full team fights, which you are going to be participating in, yeah, if it's a proper all 5 people involved in a big fight on point, you're not going to be getting a whole lot out of this ability. Again, that does not mean this ability is bad. This is basically as close as you can get to an auto take. I basically take it every game. There are just some extremely rare circumstances where if we're always playing in an extremely clumped team fight on point, I would rather not have this because of the fact that obviously I'm not going to be dueling anyone, and I might just save the slot for something else. But in 99% of my games, I'm taking Instant Karma. Alright, next up is Discord Inferno. This one is a bit of an interesting one. This is weird. I actually don't think Discord Inferno is very strong in this build, but despite that, I think it's quite necessary quite often. Essentially, the reason this is here is just to give this build any teeth. Like, don't get me wrong, the identity of this build is very defensive, intentionally so. It's more about supporting people than doing things yourself. But obviously, sometimes you will just get into a game, and it is, I've got to do something myself. I can't just enable these teammates. However they're playing, they're doing something that means no matter how much you enable them, they will just not win. And if that's the case, you've got to take matters into your own hands, you take Discord Inferno. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you're going to start being able to blow people up easily. You still have, like, no weapon power. But you do have ability power. The damage that Discord Inferno provides is ability power based, and it just gives you at least a little bit more potential to take fights and deal with things on your own. And again, even though you don't have a lot of weapon power, what you do have is ludicrous, absurd survivability that allows you to face tank ridiculous amounts of pressure. And using that ridiculous amount of face tanking pressure, that means that you can take fights in positions that no one else possibly could and still get kills despite your low damage output. Discord Inferno is basically here just so that you could actually take fights and be aggressive in the late game. That being said, if there's no need to take fights in the late game because your team is competent, you just have to keep doing a good job of keeping them alive and supporting them, then I would actually say it's pretty decent to just pass on this. In terms of pure power, I think good synergy and good enabling will do more than Discord Inferno, presuming you have a competent team. Not even like OP or anything, not even crazy, just competent. But of course, you're going to run into teams that aren't going to be very competent every now on the rank ladder, and when that happens, you break out the Discord Inferno and you try and hit some shots. You might also be wondering why there's no Discord Fever, which is a very similar power that is often taken in AP Zen builds. That is because of the fact that Discord Inferno deals the same amount of damage as Discord Fever instantaneously if you land a headshot. And don't get me wrong, you don't have to land a headshot to get the Discord Fever damage, but the Discord Inferno headshot damage is repeatable, whereas the damage from Discord Fever can only happen once. For that reason, I think Discord Inferno is better to take. I know that some of you might be less confident with your aim, but I still recommend you take it and just try anyway. Maybe if you really are, you try and you're terrible, you can try Discord Fever instead. I don't think that's too bad, but I will say, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I actually thought that Discord Inferno was going to be a bad pick, and I was going to take Discord Fever instead, because of the fact that I don't even think I've got particularly good aim. But what I found was that when I got dove, I would almost always land at least one headshot at some point in the fight. Didn't land all headshots, but if I even just land one, that's already better than Discord Fever is, because it's the same amount of damage, but instantly, and a splash that has potential to hit other targets. We'll get back to Discord Fever in a second, though. This also has the added benefit of, depending on the tank, being a really good way to farm tank for ult charge. Like, if the enemy tank is an Orisa or a Reinhardt, oh my god, you get so much damage of just firing at their head with this. And lastly on the list of powers that are on the planned build is Soul Control. A power that I'm a little bit disappointed does not work the way I thought it did with a certain synergy, but overall is still very, very strong I've found, so I didn't end up removing it. Soul Control allows you to cancel your Transcendence early, saving up to 75% of your ultimate charge. you know what, it's been a while since I've got practical, so you can see some of the explosion from Discord Inferno right there, just so you can see the extra damage that we're getting. This is with no items or modifiers, so you can see that rather than just like that, we got boom, 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 really good tank buster. But getting back to the Zenyatta ultimate cancel my ult, 75% of my ultimate left. Just do a big flash heal and like that, boom. That feels really, really good. It allows you to instantly top up people's health bars, grant you a brief period of invincibility frames, and the whole way you still get to keep your ultimate charge, or at least a significant chunk of it, which is a really, really good deal. So it's a pretty damn good power, I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of surprised it got buffed. I always thought it was decent at 65, because it used to give 65 as like the minimum that you had to, like, if you cancelled it super early. But now it's 75, so that's pretty damn good. Now, all that being said, what was the synergy that I thought worked with this? Well, you see, there's an item called Charge Plating, which I have been using a hell of a lot of, because I found a lot of ways to find spammable ults, and I thought Charge Plating was synergized with spamming your ult, because it says after you spend your ultimate charge, gain 25 armor and 10% ability power for the rest of the round. However, this might need to be rephrased. The way this is phrased implies if you continue to spend your ultimate charge, you continue to get another stack of 25 armor and 10% ability power. However, I only recently realised in the practice range when testing, this isn't the case, which is very depressing because I did go ahead and make like 3 or 4 different builds that use this item with ult spam, which is... God damn it. That doesn't mean the builds suck all of a sudden. I mean, just being able to spam your ultimate in general is pretty good, but yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty disappointed to find out it doesn't stack. Though it does make sense in hindsight, because if it did stack, that would be insanely powerful. Like, if you could just get 4 Transcendences on one round, which I know sounds ridiculous, but trust me, with this build, that's actually really realistic by the late game. 4 Transcendences in one round means that Charge Plating would be giving you plus 40% AP and plus 100 armor, which, bearing in mind, it costs 14,000 to get 35% AP, and this costs 1,000, 14 times less. Yeah, I probably don't have to explain why that would be OP, so I guess I see why it doesn't stack, although I'm still a little disappointed, and I still think they should probably reword this to make that a bit more clear. Either way, I say that despite the synergy not working, I didn't end up removing this item, and that's just because of the fact that, well, I probably don't have to explain much. Being able to just flash heal people like that to max health so quickly, and then also retain 3/4 of your ultimate charge, and also get the invincibility frames, super good. In particular, if you're the kind of guy that you always want a Transcendence for team, but you always end up getting caught out just before you get there, and you have to pop your Transcendence just to not die, if you find yourself in those situations, the fact that you can cancel your Transcendence and just use the invincibility frames to get away means that you can at least keep 3/4 of your ultimate charge when your Transcendence is forced out just to live, and then you often still get your Transcendence back in time to use it again for the team fight later by the time you make it to point. I mean, I don't think you're going to be dying too often before you make it to point anyway with this build with how tanky you are, but if you do misplay and you do find yourself actually dying before you make it to point, there you go. Now, just because these are the powers that I have set up in this build doesn't mean they're the powers you have to take. So let's talk about some other powers you might want to take. Let's talk about the elephant in the room first, Dual Harmony. If this build is all about healing, why is Dual Harmony not in here? It doubles the amount of Harmony Orbs you can use, but it reduces the healing of both of them by 40%. But that still means that you're getting a 20% boost to your healing in total. Isn't that worth it? It's worth it if both of the targets that you've got a Harmony Orb on are always in your line of sight and always taking damage. That's the thing though. Your tank is usually the only person on your team that is consistently going to be in line of sight and consistently going to be taking damage. That isn't even like your DPS's fault or anything. It's pretty stupid as a DPS to play like a tank. You really have to use cover a lot more as a DPS in Stadium, otherwise you explode. And so for that reason, you don't really get a chance to heal them with Harmony Orb. So because of the fact that DPS die very quickly, and so they have to use cover a lot, that means that a 40% less healing Harmony Orb isn't very likely to actually save them unless they're in a prolonged 1v1. And then when it comes to tanks, you've got a similar issue, where they're almost always going to be taking focus fire, and you run the risk of them actually dying if you reduce their healing by 40% to share some of it with someone else who probably doesn't need it as much. Especially because unfortunately this is Stadium and you've got to pad your stats to get credits, you really want to have maximum uptime on healing your tank, and you're not going to get maximum uptime on your healing if you're healing DPS. That doesn't mean don't heal your DPS, but it means use Harmony Orb on your tank proactively and use Harmony Orb on your DPS reactively. And because you're going to spend a lot less time using it reactively than proactively, you're going to get a lot less uptime on your healing with Dual Harmony. So in most cases, I do think this will ultimately lower your healing numbers, even if that seems unintuitive, and lead to more people dying.
Now, of course, if you find the right situation, let's say your tank is a Sigma, and they've got a very damage mitigation heavy build, they don't really need a lot of pocket, they're not really taking a lot of damage, and hey, your DPS, they're like Freya Genji, and they're like in there, they keep going deep to take these fights. You might want to take Dual Harmony then. If you are actually getting a lot of healing resources off of your DPS, and they're doing a lot with it, and you need to enable them, go ahead. But generally, your DPS are going to be playing things like hit scans, they're not going to be playing all too active, and if they are playing active, the window to heal them is going to be too small for a 40% weakened Harmony Orb to actually do much to save them. As a side note, if you are going to use Dual Harmony to pocket your flankers, you might want to combo it with Gotta Have Faith, so that the Harmony Orb stays on them as they break line of sight. This makes it so it takes 16 whole seconds for the Harmony Orb to return to you, even after they break line of sight, which to be fair is a very long time. Of course, we already briefly mentioned Discord Fever earlier. If you want to use Discord Fever you can, but I just think Inferno is a better option in most cases. You could stack both of them if you wanted to be particularly offensive, though I don't think it would make a big difference. The main way you should use Discord Fever is to use it with a completely separate synergy, where you use Liquid Nitrogen and Cyber Venom to apply slow and healing reduction when you Discord people, which is not a bad build. It's just not the build we're playing right here. Of course, you don't want any of these orb powers because it's not what the build is based around. You don't want Circle of Strife because it just sucks. I must admit I haven't tested Enlightenment, but I doubt you're going to want it considering your damage output is going to be pretty low. And Flying Kick has no synergy, though I will say if you find yourself in the unusual situation of being absolutely desperate for mobility, it can be an okay pick, but I generally wouldn't recommend it. That gets us through the powers. What about the items? Well, I won't dwell too much on some of these because a lot of these are pretty obvious. Like, custom stock is just here because early game you still kinda care about weapon power, even if you're gonna ditch it later, and this is cheap and cost effective. Hiking Hover Boots is just here because it's a broken item. I'm not gonna lie, it's got like no synergy, but it's too good to not include. Already, move speed is an extremely scarce resource in Stadium, so as much as it might sound quite mundane, plus 10% move speed for 4,000 credits is actually a huge deal. But then packaging that with the ability to levitate for up to 3 whole seconds provides insane utility and survivability in ways that you probably couldn't have even imagined. So here's a bit of a demonstration of what it looks like when you levitate around. And you can see that 3 seconds really does feel like quite a while, and it allows you to be a little bit of a mountain goat in the right situations, where you can see I made it up to this high ground by parkouring around. Particularly on maps like Ilios Ruins, there are so many high grounds that are usually inaccessible that you can reach by using this power. On top of that, you can really bamboozle and mix people up in situations where you wouldn't otherwise be able to peek an angle, and use the fact that you can float and approach from unexpected positions to make sure that you don't get your head blown off whenever you go for a cheeky play. Like, for instance, even just as something as simple as, say, I don't know, there's an enemy standing where this tank bot is, you know, they're standing here. I don't know, actually, how about like they're standing here, and they know that I'm behind this wall. Like, I am sitting here waiting behind this wall, and they know that I'm gonna peek at some point, right? Now, if I was a normal character, I would just peek like this, I would fire a bit, they would already have my crosshair on my head because they know where my head height is, they know I'm behind this corner, boom, dead. But what could happen is, I could, I don't know, get on this box before I come around the corner, I start charging these orbs, and then I jump and I float, and then I turn. And I know it seems like a small difference, but again, when they're sitting here waiting, they don't hear the float, they can't see anything, they hear you charging up orbs, and they got their crosshair here, and then you pop out here, and then they're probably not going to hit the shot. Like, they might flick their crosshair, but they're probably going to miss if they have to flick. And then you get to shoot them, and they don't get to blow your head off. I know it's just for a brief moment, obviously they're going to quickly react and then correct, but by the time they've corrected, you're back behind the wall. I know this seems really small, it might seem like I'm overthinking this, but I just have so much experience of peeking angles that I know for a fact I would explode at any other time, but I can get away with it because I float like this. Now obviously if you keep doing this the same way every time, they will start to see it coming, and they will start to, like, if they're smart, they'll start to aim like a little bit higher and be ready for it. But even then, you can mix it up. Just because you can float this high doesn't mean you have to float this high. You can float like a medium high. That's probably not much lower, but like you can float like here. Obviously, once you get to the mix-up, it does obviously get a little bit tougher because, of course, you can only make smaller differences. But even just small differences, sometimes it can throw off people's aim. I know this sounds ridiculous, but like, literally my first game on Zenyatta, I made a build similar to this. And on the final round, it was a round 7 game on Colosseo, I literally single-handedly full-held point 1v5 for 3 minutes straight. Yes, 3 minutes straight. 1v5 on point as Zen. And I didn't die at any moment.
And don't get me wrong, a lot of that was me self-healing an insane amount, a lot of that was having so much damage reduction and so much health, but a lot of that was, I was parkouring around the robot, bouncing off rocks, floating over their heads, sneaking under their legs. Everyone was running in circles trying to chase me and no one could hit a shot because they never knew where I was coming from. I would constantly, if I was out of line of sight for even a moment, just because of the barrier, because of the robot, because of a pillar, because of a rock, I would always use it to abuse like their expectations and slip under them, come a direction they don't expect. I would use the fact that I can hover to get into positions that they don't get prepared for, and so they miss their shots constantly. So yeah, I know I've talked about a lot about that item, but I just genuinely think that you basically can't play Zen without taking this item. It is auto-take. You have to take it. I literally don't care what your build is, take this item. Next up is Crusader Hydraulics, which is a good item to keep in mind on just about every character in the game, especially any character that has armor or shield health without needing to buy it as an item. Crusader Hydraulics gives you 25 armor and the ability that you take 10% reduced weapon damage so long as you have armor. This is a big deal, because, just for comparison's sake, it costs 5,000 to get an 8% boost to your health. This is basically a 10% boost to your health plus 25 armor, which is a pretty big deal. Now obviously, maybe it's more like an 8% boost because of the fact that obviously when the armor breaks and you get to this last bit, you know, that doesn't get the 10% damage reduction. So you could say 8, but even that would mean this is an equivalent boost to this with an extra 25 armor on top for a lower price. Now you could also say it's only damage resistance versus weapon damage, and that, to be fair, is a fair point. However, I think particularly in Zen's case, it's not a big concern, considering that I would say the main thing in Stadium you die to as Zen is poke damage, which is almost always from weapons. Almost never does it come from abilities. In fact, with all the powers you have to be defensive as Zen and be unkillable, you basically can't be killed by flankers when you get your build off the ground. The real thing you're scared of is a Freya. I know that's a specific thing, but like, you're kind of scared of other snipers too. Like, you're scared of Ashe, and you're a little scared of like a good soldier, but like Ashe and soldier, you can just use cover. Freya, you can't always use cover, because she's in the sky, and you can't fight back, because she's in the sky, and your orbs take way too long to reach her. But she doesn't take too long to have her arrows reach you, so, yeah. Freya's the main thing you'll worry about, and this is really good versus Freya, because of course she's going to be doing weapon damage to you, and this is going to negate 10% of that damage and make it harder to break through all that self-heal and damage resistance. So yeah, I think this is a really, really strong item to take on Zen, because it's just so low in your health bar thanks to the fact that armor hides under your shields. Then, after that, we got Nano Cola, literally just a lot of ability power. The more ability power you have, the more you can heal, the more ult charge you get, and the more survivability you have, which means the more you can push up, the more you can take space. Literally, ability power just lets you do everything with this build. It's not even a give and take. It's not even like, oh, you lose offensive capabilities, because yeah, in theory, you get less damage, but what you get is more health that can be used to push up more aggressively and take more aggressive positions, so you can still play aggressively with a defensive tool. So like, you just get everything. You get everything from getting more ability power, so you hard focus it. Catalytic Crystal is here, as you saw, because you get to farm ult if you use this correctly. You invest heavily into AP, you take the self-heal stuff, you get everything you can out of Harmony Orb. Your ultimate just charges at light speed, so that's amazing. You've got Friendship Bracelet to increase your healing even more by up to 20%, as long as you're close to the guy that you're healing. Champion's Kit, just even more ability power. And finally, Nebula Conduit. Honestly, the more I play, the more I think this is often overkill, but I'm still going to include it just in case you really are getting focused a lot. Nebula Conduit is an ability that gives you 50 health, 5% weapon power, and the ability to prevent 15% of the damage that you take, and instead take it 3 seconds in the future as a damage over time. Now usually this is an item that I combo with Ogun Demon Reduction Field, as it provides damage resistance for every instance of damage you take that stacks up to 20 times, and the stacks of damage resistance do get triggered by the damage over time from Nebula Conduit, so combining these two items basically constantly keeps Ogun Demon Reduction Field at 10% damage resistance, the maximum, which is pretty good. However, I don't have it in the build here, although if you have tons of cash to spare, you can try it. And that's because, quite frankly, I don't think you need it here, actually. Because already, you just get so much health from Inner Peace, and preventing 15% of the damage, and buying that time for Inner Peace to heal the health back, that I don't really think you need to spend an extra item slot and an extra 11k on getting more survivability. You probably get more survivability and get more value out of just taking even more ability power rather than more survivability. As for the flex slot, we've got this charge plating item I talked about earlier. Even if it doesn't stack like I hoped it did, I didn't remove it because of the fact that, if you didn't already know, again, most of you should know by now, but the cheaper an item is, the more cost efficient it is. For example, this is 1,000 credits for 10% ability power. Good deal. However, this one is 6,000 credits for 20%. Hang on a minute, the cost tripled. and this one is 14,000 for 35%. The reason it's like this is obviously you've only got 6 slots for items, so as you run out of item slots, it's better to take more expensive items because you only can take so many. However, in the early game, it's way more cost effective to stack multiple cheap items rather than getting a few expensive items. The reason that you might see some people focus on a particularly expensive item is usually only if that item provides something nothing else can, and in whatever situation you're in, that buff is invaluable. But generally speaking, in terms of hard stats and just cost ratios, it is much more efficient to get more cheaper things than to get fewer expensive things. The reason I bring this up is because there is only one item that is going to give you 10% ability power for 1,000 credits, and that's Power Playbook. But if you wanted a second 1,000 credit item that's going to give that, the best bet you've got is Charge Plating. You just have to wait to use your ultimate before you can actually get the benefit, but you do also get the 25 armor. So yes, say like you have only got 2,000 credits left after you bought a bunch of expensive items, and you wanted as much AP as possible, you would take Charge Plating as well as Power Playbook. That's basically why it's here, to remind you, hey, you actually probably want to take this if you want to double stack the 10% AP boost. Over here, we just got an ability that makes it so Harmony Orb heals people for 15% more while they're in the air. This obviously depends on your team comp, though I would like to say, you might think this is mostly just useful for Freya and maybe D.Va, but it also applies to characters like Genji, or even Junkrat. Being in the air doesn't mean flying, it just means being in the air. As long as you're not standing on the ground, you get the boost. Satch's Solution is also an item I'm coming around on. I didn't like it as much at first because I do think its special effect is pretty useless. It makes Transcendence slowly get bigger the longer it goes, but aside from a couple situations where it might get just enough range to heal someone at the last minute as you're rushing to point in overtime, outside of that very niche case, I think that this ability is pretty weak. But the reason I've come around on it is because of the fact it provides a further 10% move speed for the same price as the last item, which is already a good deal, plus 10% ability power. Basically, I think this special ability here is near useless, but 10% ability power and 10% move speed is already such a good deal for 4,000 credits that you want it anyway. I mean, just so you get an idea, like, I know this might not look like much, but this is a huge difference compared to before. Like, the amount of time it's going to take me to walk all the way to here and then walk back, and then I sell these items and I try it again, you're going to notice the difference, and it really is a significant difference. And when you consider that difference when it comes to maybe running to point in overtime, getting to someone to heal them before they're dead, or just running away from someone who's attacking you, you can see how that 20% move speed is a pretty big deal, especially when it's permanent and unconditional. So yeah, this is basically just here for the stats, and that just leaves Divine Intervention. So as I mentioned, Phantasmic Flux was previously in this slot, and I don't think Phantasmic Flux is a terrible option, but I think Divine Intervention might be better. I must admit, this is an item I've criminally underused, not because I didn't think what it could do can be good, but to be quite frank, I read things into how this ability works that just aren't true. I don't know how, I guess I'm just an idiot. Basically, when I read the ability, I assumed it was something that could only happen once per fight. It gives 50 shields and the ability that when you take more than 100 damage at once, you regenerate 20% of the damage taken immediately and then start regenerating your shields. Essentially, this is 20% damage resistance versus burst, which is a lot of damage resistance, and the fact that late game everything's going to become burst means that this is going to become really good in the late game. But the only reason I thought this item sucked is for some reason, even though it never says this anyway, I got it in my head that it only worked for the first shot, and then any other further shots, even if they still did more than 100 damage, wouldn't receive the damage resistance. But no, it never says that anywhere. It triggers every single time you take more than 100 damage at once, which means it actually is a really good survival item. The main reason why it's here is, besides the fact it's just good and cheap, well, not cheap, but like cheap by the standard of expensive survival items. The reason this is here is the same reason Nebula Conduit is here, although it's a cheaper option than Nebula Conduit. Both Inner Peace and Instant Karma are ludicrous ways of mitigating damage, but they do have one weakness. The shorter the fight is, the less they will do. Now, again, Stadium is a mode that favours sustained damage over burst, unlike normal Overwatch, which favours burst over sustain, generally speaking. But just because it favours sustain doesn't mean burst can't exist in Stadium. Sometimes you still will get bursted down, and that's the one thing this build can't deal with, is burst. So, that's where these items come in. You can take Divine Intervention and Nebula Conduit to help adapt to the fact that you're dying so fast you can't even get all this value from the self-heal and damage reduction that you have.
That door!
Overall though, that's the Zen build. I just want to take some time to talk about some items that aren't included in the build that either
are suggestions that, like, I just think were too niche, but you could use them, or alternatively, items that you probably expected would be in the build, but I actually have a good reason to not run them. Obviously, we're not really running anything in the weapon category because of the fact that this is not a weapon power build. The first thing I need to clear up, there's a bunch of ability power items that trigger special abilities when you use an ability, like Lumerico Fusion Drive, which regenerates armor, or 3-tap Tommy Gun, which makes it so the next few attacks take extra damage as percentage off of people's lives, or Mark of the Kitsune, which adds 25 bonus damage or healing whenever you use an ability. These, in theory, will be really good with Harmony Orb and Discord Orb, except the game thought of that. Because they have no cooldown, you would be able to spam them and these would be broken. So they don't count. Yeah, you don't actually have any way to trigger these on Zen other than to take Flying Kick. The 5-second cooldown on Flying Kick makes it a real ability. So if you wanted to use these, you would have to take the Flying Kick, and it would be the only way to activate these. Which, in fairness, might not be a terrible idea. A 5-second cooldown is relatively quick, but obviously it's kind of turning this build into something different. I don't like increasing the duration of Transcendence because usually you want to flash heal anyway and cancel it quickly. Mind Shaper actually isn't bad, I just think usually there are better ability items to take, but having 15% starting ultimate charge, 15% ability power, and the ability to give cooldowns back faster while in Transcendence is quite nice, though once again you're usually cancelling Transcendence early, so it's kind of questionable how much value you're going to get out of that persistent value from Transcendence. As I said, Phantasmic Flux is a decent ability, but I just removed it because obviously you don't do that much damage with this build. You can, but a lot of the times you're not going to be doing the maximum amount of damage, so you're not going to be getting the most out of the lifesteal. You still can farm tank for it, but I don't know. I just think it's better to invest in just hard ability power and not just, like, go 50-50. Ooh, a bit of survivability, a bit of ability power. No, just go hard on ability power. And only take survivability if it's to deal with burst damage, like with Nebula Conduit or Divine Intervention. As I said, Ogun Demon Reduction Field does synergize well with Nebula Conduit if you're taking it, but like I say, you don't want to take too many survival items in my opinion, so that's why I don't want to include it. You could in theory take Vanadium Injection to get this massive menagerie of buffs all at once while you have your ultimate and not using it, and because you charge your ult so fast and you can cancel it early, you will spend a decent amount of time holding your ultimate and not using it. That being said, a lot of these buffs are so widely spread that they're not actually hugely relevant to your build. Not to say they're bad, but it's not that crazy to say it's got such a downside to it. So while I don't think Vanadium Injection is a terrible idea, I doubt you're going to be using it, and even if you were, I think it would be like the kind of thing you only use in like round 6 or 7, so... Teacher's Totem obviously is going to find occasional use, where essentially it provides 10% reduced ability damage to allies affected by Harmony Orb, and I believe that also might apply to you. I need to actually double check that, but that's a hard one to test. That being said, the only reason it's not in the build is because it's so situational. Essentially, I only think this is worth it if most of the enemy team is going ability power, which I'm not saying that won't happen, that will happen sometimes, but I definitely think you have to check, you have to see, okay, is the enemy build ability power? If it is, yes, take this. If not, if it's only a couple people taking ability power, and most of the damage is coming from weapons, and as I say, I think you specifically definitely will usually be more scared about weapon damage, you don't need this. Lastly though, probably the biggest elephant in the room is Meditation Mat. Why am I not using this item? Because in fairness, what it does is very strong. Like, when this does what you want it to, it's very, very good. It provides 50 armor for 10,000 credits, and the extremely powerful ability that when your shields are depleted, you unleash a damaging knockback AoE, dealing 80 damage at base that can be amplified with ability power, and it can trigger a maximum of every 6 seconds whenever shields are destroyed. This makes you undivable, and so you might think, why on earth would I not be running this, especially when I can amplify the damage of the AoE with AP? But there is a reason why we're not running this, and that reason is that Meditation Mat is mostly only good versus flankers, and haven't we been talking about this whole time how you already destroy flankers? Your previous counters do nothing to you on this build, and so essentially I think this item's too greedy. You don't get any AP for taking this item, and you only are going to be better at fighting people you're already going to dominate. So that's essentially my issue with the item. Like I said, I think the best thing at countering Zen in Stadium is a Freya in the sky blasting me in the head. How does this help you against a Freya? I mean, it helps you against a Genji, but are you really dying to a Genji in the late game when you saw how fast my health can regenerate when this build gets off the ground? Is that really what you're worried about? I think you're more going to be worried about people who don't get in your face. I think people in your face are the people that you can take out. The people you can't take out are the people who camp in the sky or camp miles back and snipe and take your head off in situations where cover can't save you. I suppose for that reason you could also potentially take Iron Eyes as well, the rare survivability item that gives 25 shields and 20% damage reduction versus headshots. I'm not gonna lie, I sometimes forget this item exists, because as good as it sounds in theory, I find it's quite a risky pick. You never know when people are going to hit shots, and often it's pretty hard for people to go for headshot-based builds, so it's very hard to identify an easy target to take Iron Eyes versus. That doesn't mean it's bad necessarily. I must admit, I still feel like I'm kind of figuring out whether this is a good or bad item. So I guess I could throw this in there last minute as one extra consideration. Ultimately though, I think that's going to do it for me. I have had a lot of success with this build, more so than any other support build I have tried in Stadium. I think last time I checked, my win rate with this build so far is 14 games won and 4 games lost, so it's gone pretty good. So obviously I highly recommend using this in your future games. I really hope it will help you climb, and as I say, it's not a particularly stressful build, so hopefully it won't stress you out climbing with this build. I'm sure there's been similar builds out there. This isn't the most groundbreaking creative build, but this is just the way I went about optimizing this approach to Zenyatta. With all that said, thank you for watching, and I'm hoping to cover Moira next. See you then. Bye.